Thank you, Corinna. Thank you, Asia Society. I can't tell the audience how much support I've gotten from Asia Society over the last 4 years of this show being in planning. That, you know, a few minor world events led to a delay. And Asia Society has been great all the way through. In fact, the story of putting together this exhibition and opening it that will be told tonight is, in fact, as much a story of globalization as the lives of the artists that are featured tonight. I just want to say that Asia Society has always been a great inspiration to me. More than 20 years ago, I saw the show Inside Out, which was their first show, the first show in the United States, bringing Chinese contemporary art to the United States. I guess it's 30 years ago now. 25? 1998. 1998. I was a young journalist and I saw a good story and I saw art that I really loved. And people at Asia Society, I have to say, were saints. I asked every obnoxious question an American journalist asked in those days about China, and people were completely patient with me, which led me to get on a plane and actually go to China, meet many of those artists. And then after writing about the older generation of Chinese artists, I got very interested in the rapid change that was taking place in China, moving from an agrarian country to an urbanized country, moving into being a place where there's a Starbucks in the Forbidden City, where there were bootleg DVDs of every movie in the world, where I saw a young generation emerging that were totally influenced by several things. The one-child policy, they were all products of the one-child policy. The open door policy, meaning they grew up with as many foreign influences as Chinese influences. The advent of the internet, which broke down a lot of walls for them in terms of what they had access to about contemporary art and about the world. And I got very curious about how political and social change impacts creative people. And so I began interviewing artists of that generation starting in 2014, which resulted in my book, Brand New Art from China, which was published in 2018. And then as a dream come true, Asia Society asked me, based on that book, if I would curate a show on that generation. That it has opened is beyond my wildest dreams. And just shows you how much China took over my life. And plus, the artists that I met were wonderful people, in addition to being incredibly creative and energetic people. So tonight we have 4 artists with us who I will introduce to you, but please join me. Oh, I have the mic, so I don't need this.
Also, for our virtual audience, any questions can be typed in the chat box of whatever platform you're watching this in.
Yes, I wanted to say that I really appreciate those of you who came out in a heat wave, but there is a much larger audience outside of this room watching this, and I really want to welcome all those people too. So tonight we have with us in the audience Pixy Liao and Miao Ying, who both live in New York. And we have as translator and commentary Banyi Huang, who was very instrumental in the research I did while writing my book. She was my research assistant. They were my research assistant and totally kept me honest about my impressions of Chinese young people and what they might actually, how they might actually see themselves. On the screen, we have right now Nabuqi and Tao Hui, who will be coming into us from Beijing. Before they get to open their mouths. I have to talk a little bit more, which is I wanted to familiarize you with their work quickly so that the rest of the evening can be an honest discussion between us. So the first artist, Pixy Liao, who's here, is best known for her provocative series, Experimental Relationships, in which she collaborates with her partner, Moreau, and creates these kind of playful, surrealist scenes that definitely shift the power balance between men and women. And when I met Pixy many years ago, what she explained to me is that what fascinated her about coming to the United States for graduate school is that she was liberated from the stereotypes of what roles women were supposed to play in Shanghai. Growing up in Shanghai, what her family wanted from her, which she imagined, and I'm sure she'll talk about it more, to be, a wealthy man who could buy her a house. That is pretty much what families want for their young women. And also what plays a role in it is that with the one-child policy, there's tremendous pressure on young women to reproduce. Now there's a two-child policy, so there's even more pressure to reproduce because otherwise there's no grandchildren carrying on the family name. So Pixy, in loving, surreal, playful ways, comments on all of that just in her photographs between her and Moreau. Tao Hui. Hi, Tao Hui.
Hi.
Tao Hui I have followed Tao Hui's work for a number of years. He has always been open about having a queer sensibility and a queer aesthetic to the work, and often looks at narratives from decidedly non-queer sources like Chinese soap operas. He grew up on a mountain, in a mountain village. There was no media other than his mother reading soap operas, listening to soap operas, and then finally watching soap operas. And Chinese soap operas, sorry about that, are often staged in grand love stories of great love taking place with wars going on, or the Ming Dynasty or the Han Dynasty, with historic backdrops. So he has brought elements of that into his work, like what we have here, the work called Similar Disguise, which is a soap opera on TikTok. And these are stills from the soap opera, but if you look closely, you will see that the gender roles are reversed and that often it's non-binary people playing the roles in the soap opera. This is controversial in China right now because Xi Jinping has made it very difficult to show images of gay people in television or movies. So instead, Tao Hui relied on TikTok to reach a vast audience with this piece, and we thought that would be the best way to present it to you here, with QR codes for each episode. And it's beautiful, in addition to everything else. I mean, I make everybody sound so brainy, but also the artists in this exhibition are visually very stimulating. Nabuqi, who was born in Inner Mongolia in 1984, came to Beijing to study at the Central Academy of Fine Arts. And her installations are really puzzles. She says that her work is a lot about spatial relationships and what is reality and what is not reality, and how you can convince people of a reality by making an installation that's entirely fake. So, like, for example, in our show, she has what I always focus on, and she might disagree, is the Oriental rug, which is from, IKEA or eBay upstairs, and in fact is mass-produced in China. So is it a fake Oriental rug or is it a genuine Chinese rug? The installation raises all these kind of questions. And she was very influenced by pop art, particularly this work by Richard Hamilton from 1956, which is considered the first work of pop art. Just what is it that makes today's homes so different, so appealing? Well, we're looking at one of today's homes in her installation upstairs. And one thing that makes it so appealing is that you can get that home whether you're in China or you're in New York City, even though all of the elements in it are made in China. We just buy it at IKEA. And I wanted to show you this installation, Do Real Things Happen in Moments of Rationality, which was her installation at the last Venice Biennale that had everything in it from a train track to a cow. A dreamlike state that felt very real. And finally, we have Miao Ying, who went to the best new media department in China at in Hangzhou at the China Academy of Arts. And she then came to the United States to go to Alfred University to major in digital media. And her work involves artificial intelligence, VR, all of the latest technology to comment on how technology is affecting our lives, not just in China, but also in the United States. The piece we have in our show is a combination of two works of art, Surplus Intelligence, which was totally created by an AI computer-generated story, and Pilgrimage into Walden 12, again, a computer-generated thing that creates its own narrative as you play a game, all about shepherds trying to control people and gently make them better citizens. That's all I'm going to say for now. We'll let Miao Ying describe more. But I just wanted you to know Miao Ying has always done the most astute work on the internet in China. So a piece she did with the New Museum, Chinternet, was a celebration of the Chinese internet. We think of the Chinese internet as difficult or troublesome because of the Great Firewall, which censors all activity. But Miao Ying sees it as a challenge that spurs great creativity on the part of the Chinese citizens. And finally, a piece that I truly adore, and I'm just showing it to you because I like it, is her hardcore digital detox, which is almost like an amusement park you go through, that each station is supposed to make you less addicted to the internet. So those are our four artists. We couldn't have more different kinds of art making. We have installation, we have photography, we have digital media, and we have film. And I think what's great about this show was summed up by a man who was leaving Asia Society the other day, angrily saying to me, "Where is the Asian art? I thought this museum shows Asian art." I was like, "Well, it's all made in Asia." And he was like, "You know what I mean." So we didn't include dragons or Buddhas in our exhibition, and maybe that will open some minds. So I have questions to stimulate conversation, and let's start with the people who are in Beijing, because they got up very early in the morning this morning to join us. So Banyi, will you translate this? I'm very curious about all of the four artists talking about where they grew up, and what was that place like in the 1980s and early 90s when they were growing up there, just to give our audience some background.
Hello， 你们能听到我吗？ 这个问题是给纳布齐和陶慧的。就是问题是你们是在家乡是哪里的？然后那里就是80年代至90年代初期是什么样的？你们描述一下。
我是出生在重庆市，应该当时还是四川省的，就是云阳县。后来，然后重庆市独立出来，变成了直辖市，然后我们就属于重庆了。然后我是在那个长江边上的一个山村，然后我父母都是乡村老师。然后那个时候，我觉得可能就是信息比较闭塞吧，然后我能了解外面的唯一的渠道就是看电视。所以说我那个时候就每天都在家里看电视，然后看不同的电视剧啊、新闻啊，那个就是我最早然后看到外面世界的一个通道。对。
OK。
我是在内蒙古的一个城市，当时叫乌兰察布盟，当时内蒙是分了好多个所谓的盟，然后后来由这个盟变成了市级，所以现在叫乌兰察布市。然后我是在这个乌兰察布市里面的一个区域，吉宁区。然后其实它就是一个北方的一个偏小型的一个城市吧，我觉得也并不是，就是我之后来北京上学之后，大家都问我，就是你们内蒙古是不是到处都是草原之类的那种环境？其实也不是，它就是一个比较普通的这种北方城市，我觉得应该跟当时其他的这种北方城市都差不多。那我小时候，当然跟现在比起来的话，其实物资啊各方面还是比较匮乏的，就是没有现在这么丰富。对，但是我离开家比较早，我大概16岁的时候就来北京上高中了，所以对，就是挺早的。
Okay. No, well, okay, I'm gonna translate. So for Tao Hui was born in Chongqing. It used to belong to Sichuan province, but then it became independent. He grew up in a village by the Changjiang. Yangtze River. And both of his parents were teachers. He said there was not much information coming from the outside, so he mostly learned about the world by watching a lot of TV and watching the news. So that was like an avenue into the outside world. And then for Nabuqi, she grew up in a city in Inner Mongolia. It used to be a Wulan Chabu, it's a city called that. And it's quite a small scale city. People often, like not from the region, would often have a stereotype of Inner Mongolia as only being like grassy grassland, meadows. But it's actually a typical northern city. And she said that the material goods were pretty much lacking at the time. But she left home very early when she was 16 for Beijing to go to high school.
We're going to explore that in a second, but I just wanted to ask, Pixy and Ying grew up in Shanghai, right? So Shanghai went through an enormous transformation in your childhoods, correct?
Yeah, I think I'm the oldest among these four artists. I was born in 1979, the end of 1979. And I remember when we were young, the life was so simple and everybody was very poor. I think at the time, average salary would be like $4 or $5 a month. And I think we used to buy food, not with money, but with coupons. And there's not many options out there, but everybody is having this very simple life. Like you have simple role, like a worker, or you are a mom, or you're a student, and you do your job well, and that's it. But the life was super stable. Everybody's kind of similar. And I think from 90s, early 90s, or even late 80s, things start to get because open door policy and there's outside information comes in. I remember when I was maybe 15, 16, like mid 90s, I discovered there's a back alley close to my school that I can buy those cracked CDs. Those are like
Those what?
cracked CDs. That's what we call it. It's like a CD, but it's like
CD.
It was cut. So these are kind of illegally imported into China from the West. Those abundant foreign music, or sometimes we can find movies. And I was so fascinated. I started to, oh wow, there's so much more things that I can get my hands on. That was my impression.
I remembered. Is it on?
Yeah.
I remembered. Yeah, I agree with you. But I think when I was really little, like I now recall the memory, it's kind of black and white. But all I remembered is those billboards of ads, and I think it's like the early 90s in the People's Square. Like, you know, when you take the bus and then it's like the terminal of all the bus stop. And my mom would send me there to practice my drawing because I started to learn like drawing in really early age. It's really hard to get into an art school. So I go there and it's kind of the center. That's where the government bureau, the bureau of like Shanghai needs, like where it is. And then it has a People's Square and just like billboards. Like I just watch those images. That's one moment that I always remember when I think back in my childhood. And the other thing is because both of my parents, they are full-time, like almost no one is like, there's no such thing as like stay-home mom. So I remember like always like being like in the States, it would be totally illegal, but I was left home by myself and I'm just like reading. I was looking at the calendar, like I felt like it wasn't much, like there's TV, but I was not allowed to watch TV. So there's any like magazines or like, oh, I remember this picture and I would draw on the furniture and my mom would get really mad at me. But I was like memory of leaving, like being all by myself. And in Shanghai, like everyone lives it's kind of like New York, and everyone lives inside of, you know, a building with like 6, 7, you know, store, like walk up. And it's very kind of isolated, like, you know, it's like city, like the neighbors, or it's not like in here, like it's, you know, co-op, like you kind of like know, you know, all your neighbors. I feel like it was more isolated in China. Like I don't ever talk to my neighbors, like just the neighbors who are next door, but like I don't know who lives, you know, above us or below us, just like really, yeah, like the only child and I only play with my cousins like on occasion, you know, in Chinese New Year or something, just really lonely and like billboards. That's like my memory.
Yeah, it's really interesting to me. Continuing this conversation, I'd love to ask Nabuqi what in Inner Mongolia motivated her to want to be an artist and go all the way to Beijing to study.
这个纳布齐这个问题是给你的，就是他问你，就是在内蒙的时候，你有什么样的经历让你会想去北京
做艺术？
北京做艺术？
就是很多人都会觉得内蒙是一个很偏远的地方，其实，就是其实我就是来了北京之后，也有很多人问我这个问题，就是你是怎么从那么遥远的一个地方来到北京的？就是感觉它是一个信息完全匮乏，跟其他的地方都没有连接的地方。但是其实还好，就是我住的那个城市其实离北京并不是很远，它基本上是在挨着河北，然后过了河北之后是北京。所以其实跟比如说南方的好多或者是很北方的地方比起来，我们家离北京还算是近的。我呢是也是就是从很小的时候就在学画画，就是小学的时候就开始学画画，然后呢就一直在 跟着一个老师在学。然后到了要读高中的时候，其实我有点想离开，就是不是很想在我们那个城市读那个所谓的重点高中，就是那种好的学校，最好的那种高中，因为我觉得那个气氛会非常压抑。所以呢，我就决定要去选择离开那个城市。然后，那当时可能我唯一的选择就是到北京来读这个美院附中，就中央美院附中，就是一个美术高中。这样我就可以逃避，就是避开去上我们家那边的那个重点高中，就是这样。我就是来试了一下，就是想那我就试一下吧，冒一个险，然后就来了北京，然后就这样，对，到现在。
Okay.
Thank you.
So she said that a lot of people think that the city that she's from is very remote, but that is very isolated. But it's actually not very far from Beijing. It's like right next to the Hebei province. And so she also started drawing at a very young age in primary school, and she studied with a teacher. And in high school, she wanted to leave because she didn't want to go to the really important high school, like that's deemed like the best, and she felt that it would be too oppressive, and so her only choice was to go to high school in Beijing. She went to the high school that's affiliated with the Central Academy of Art, and has since been on an adventure.
Great. And Tao Hui, could you ask Tao Hui? Similarly?
对，陶辉这个他也问你同样的问题，就是是什么让你想要去对 wait what was the question was
What motivated him from...
就是什么是就你在家乡的什么样的经历让你会想去做艺术？
我其实然后就是从小也是很喜欢画画，但是我是可能就是在那个中国是一个不断迁徙的过程吧。我首先是从那个山上的小镇，然后到了到了那个就是另外一个镇上，跟上了一个从村庄到了镇上，再从镇上到了那个县城，再从县城去了重庆上大学，然后重庆上完大学以后来了北京，然后可能就是为什么会做艺术，可能就是因为从小就是很喜欢，然后就是也没有其他的选择，因为觉得好像除了做艺术也不会做别的了。
Okay.
Short and sweet.
Yeah. Yes. So Tao Hui said that he also really liked to draw as a child, and his growing up experience has basically been a lot of moving. Like he moved from a village to a town, like size up from a village, and then to it's a size up a county. I don't know. And then to university, and then he moved to Beijing. And he's always liked art, and couldn't really think of anything else to do. So,
you know what's really interesting to me is that by the time all of you were growing up, there were very good art schools to go to. And there was the beginning of an art infrastructure pretty soon by the time you were graduating art school. There was the beginning of galleries and, auction houses and museums. Did your families encourage you to become artists or discourage you from becoming artists? Right. Go ahead. Yeah.
So when I was young, when I was little, my mom really wanted me to play piano. It's like to fulfill her dream. And I have absolutely no talent in music. Like until now, I can't even tell the difference of the tone. But like my mom is this like really stereotype, very strict Asian mom. And she would send me to like music school. But like back to like what I was saying, like my experience when I was left at home by myself, all I wanted to do is drawing. And my mom was kind of like, didn't take it seriously. She's like, oh, like all kids like to draw, they don't know how to like, write. And then I kind of protest like every year, at Chinese New Year, I would tell, she has a really respectful uncle, and I would tell my great uncle. And eventually she's like, okay, she's like, I'm gonna, send you to a like after school program for drawing. But if you gave up, then I'm gonna, kind of beat you up. So I was like really scared, because she really like, yeah. So that's how I kind of stick all the way, so I think my mom doesn't want me to be an artist. She was kind of thinking, oh, it's a skill, like you can be a designer,
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't very, like, I didn't felt very supportive, definitely at the beginning of my career, yeah.
And Pixie, your parents saw you as becoming a designer also, right?
It's kind of very different. I think I took a very different route than anybody because I didn't start to study art until I was 25. The reason for that is I think I liked art since I was a kid, but my family, they never encouraged me to pursue art. They always tell me, if you become artist, you're gonna end up sweeping the street. You cannot make money. So my
Which was
job,
true for their generation.
yeah, for my generation, that was true. So my job was just to study really hard, get good score, get to go to good schools. And I fulfilled all their dreams. And I graduated from the university in China. It's very nice. And I just, start to work. And I was working as a freelance graphic designer because I just like picked up graphic design as a hobby when I was in school. And then I think until the point that I feel like I'm really frustrated with my life because I never really got to do what I really want to do. I was frustrated with my job. And I started to think, I'm 25, like, why don't I just go, actually study something I enjoy? That's why I came to the United States and studied photography and kind of changed my life direction. Yeah.
And now what do your parents say?
Now they're okay.
All right, cool.
I mean, they've been persuading me to get a job too. Get a job.
A question that I find really interesting is that some of the artists in the exhibition, you could say that they're not thinking about China at all, and other artists, you can see that they're actually doing work that reflects something about coming from China or having a Chinese background. And I'm really curious because when I was interviewing artists in China, almost all of them said, I don't want to be categorized as a Chinese artist. I want to be seen as a global artist. So I'm curious for you for how big a role China plays in your imagination, or if you're on to other things now.
Do you want me to translate?
Yes, please.
对，纳布契和陶辉就是巴巴问了一个问题，就是他说，就是他在采访那个很多中国艺术家的时候，就是很多人都不想去被就是叫做中国艺术家，或者是分类成中国艺术家。有一些，然后这个展览中呢，有一些艺术家在就是通过作品在阐述自己的这个中国身份，那有一些并不是这样子，所以说他想问一下你们，对这个就是你在自己的作品中是不是会去探索自己的这个中国的身份？你是怎么想的？
我觉得我好像没有很刻意的去探索这个中国身份吧，但是，因为作品里面的有一些，或者说很多因素其实都是来源于生活的嘛，就是周围的这些生活，然后你看到的东西，你受到的影响，所以，怎么说呢？就是我觉得。就是在作品里其实能看到这些因素，但是呢，我并没有就是比如说我的艺术的主要的目的并不是去探索这个中国的身份的问题吧，对。
对我来讲可能也是。
Wait, tell Dogisha.
So Nabuqi's response is that she doesn't feel that she is intentionally like negotiating her Chinese identity. In her work, there's a lot of elements that come from her life. So what she sees, what she's influenced by, like the day to day. You can see these elements, but like her goal isn't to explore her Chinese identity.
And Tao Hui?
OK， 对于我来讲，可能就是什么民族啊，或者国家呀，或者是你的取向，这些身份其实都不是很重要的。可能对我来讲，最重要的是，就是我作为一个艺术家，我要在那个艺术领域里去，就是努力去，然后发现一些可能我自己就之前被忽略的一些视角。然后我觉得这个对我来说是很重要的，但是因为你生长在中国，然后你的经验都来自于中国，可能你的作品里或多或少就有一些中国的经验在，但是我觉得那个不是能定义一个人的身份的一个东西，因为也有很多可能不在中国的艺术家，他的经验可能跟中国相似，那我们也可以叫他为中国艺术家嘛。我觉得可能就是现在很多就是关于身份的讨论，我就觉得可能有点太片面化了，因为我们可以更宽泛的去了解它。
So Tao Hui says that for him, identity isn't that important. As an artist, he always tries to discover perspectives that have been previously neglected or looked past. But since he grew up in China and has had like Chinese experiences, that finds its way into his work. But he doesn't think that can define a person. Like for example, if someone like spends a lot of time in China and they're an artist, can they be called a Chinese artist? And he finds that a lot of discussions like surrounding identity now seem to be too like narrow.
Oh, how would he expand it? How would he would like to see it expand?
就是你说如果说太片，就是身份政治太片面的话，你觉得怎么样能够会变得更加的开放一些？
我觉得可能就是把那个身份，然后不是再作为第一选项，然后去讨论，然后可能最讨论的，然后就最多的应该是那个作品本身，然后就是不要去根据他的什么生存经验去判断，我觉得可能会有一些变化。
生存什么？你刚才说？
生存经验。
生存。So he says that so the way to not make it very narrow is for identity not to be like the first choice, like the first like filter that you see the work through. It should be the work that comes first, and also like the life experience.
It's interesting because I would say in this exhibition, Tao Hui's work looks the most Chinese because he's basing it on Chinese soap operas.
他说你的作品但是就是比较有意思一点，就是你的这个作品在展览中就是看起来就是最中国的，因为就是基于电视剧嘛。
对，但是我觉得我那个作品它可能内容上看起来就是有很多中国的经验，视觉经验，但实际上它是基于 TikTok 平台，我觉得这是一个很国际化的平台，就是它是竖屏的，然后就是而且完全是在那个 TikTok 上播放的，所以说可能就从另外一方面讲，它可能又不是那么中国了。
Yes, he says on the flip side of that, the visual experience is very Chinese, but the platform like TikTok is very global, and the work is also like presented in a vertical format, so that makes it like not very Chinese.
Okay. And Miao Ying, what do you think?
I have no problem embracing like the Chinese identity. I felt like it's often like, you know, it's to me, I felt it's kind of a privilege that I get to witness, you know, in this 40 years, like how rapidly everything has changed. And I felt like it's like, you know, like it might take like 100 or 200 years. You know, people always say that, you know, it happened, it didn't happen. You know, in a month, like a bridge was built. My elementary school, my middle school, my high school, they're all gone. I felt like my generation kind of got into, like it got packed into what would happen like in 100 years, but in, you know, like a really short period of time. And I felt it sucks in a way, but I felt it's also, there's something really rich about it. And I also think that people like ask like American artists, like, do you want to erase your American identity? I feel like it's, you know, it's really nature. Like it's a natural thing. I feel like it's more of like what kind of box that people wanted to put your identity into. I think I'd like, to me, I feel like I witnessed all this different kind of period, like phases of the Chinese internet. And I really felt it was a really, I say that all the time. It's like, if I were a painter, this is going to be a really, it's a canvas. And I felt it's really rich. It's almost like it's almost like a canvas that I couldn't buy elsewhere.
Yeah, you know, it's really interesting. One of the things that you said about the rapid change, I try to explain to people that from the year you all were born to the year you went to college, it is as if you lived in two different countries in two different centuries. Mm-hmm. That the change was so dramatic. Pixie, do you think this is a dumb question?
No, I don't think it's.
No, I didn't think. No, I didn't think that. But I'm thinking about Pixie's work and how she might relate to this or not relate to this.
I think when I was young, I never really thought I'm very Chinese because I was so much influenced by Western culture, like art and music, and I thought my thoughts are very Westernized. But actually, after coming to the United States and like meeting Americans, like meeting people from other countries, I realized like everything that I think about, no matter I want it or not, it's very Chinese compared to other people because it's a very different way of thinking. It's based on my past experience in China, which is, you cannot erase that. So then I start to think, you know, even though I'm not like really trying to be a Chinese artist, I am just naturally am, and you know, and I don't think I reject that identity anymore.
Banyi, I'm curious what you think about this question.
Well, I was born in the 90s, but I guess like I would say similar generation. Like I feel like, yeah, I would identify as like a diasporic, like a Chinese diaspora person, just like because that's sort of you know, like a term that refers to like, you know, like people who come from one place and they, you know, migration and like all the identity traumas, everything that comes with it, like it entails like movement, like migration, immigration, all of that. So I guess, yeah, more and more I'm starting to identify with that term.
And something that I was exploring in doing the exhibition, but I really wonder how you feel about it, is that when I dealt with artists of an older generation, they really saw China versus the world, or East versus West. And with all of you, I feel like you no longer experience the world in this kind of black and white way, or oppositional way. Could you translate them for Nabuqi and?
他刚才说就是他说老一代的中国艺术家可能看世界总是就是比较分，就是东西方还是比较对立的。我听起来就是在 Cold War， 就比较受冷战的就是那种影响。然后但是新一代的艺术家并没有这种对立感。
Yeah, and because I see in her work very sharply this kind of blur of what nationality or going beyond geographic boundaries.
纳布齐他说就是在你的作品中，他看到了很多这种就是去抹清这种国界，或者是就是看不清是从哪里来。你说这个是比较刻意的吗？
我觉得我好像也没有刻意去抹清这个，或者说模糊这个界限吧。我感觉好像没有。但是现在跟以前确实很不一样嘛，像以前就是比如说对上一代人来说，这个世界相对来说是隔离的，但是现在其实当然疫情是另外一回事嘛，就是被强制的大家这样去不能旅行啊，或者是不能相互的走动，但是在疫情之前的时候还是挺多的这种交流啊，不管是展览上面的交流，还是你可以走出去去看很多其他的东西，包括信息也很发达呀，很多啊这样，所以我觉得这个区别可能比较大吧，就是对于上一代人来说，这种隔离其实会造成一种想象上面的这种。不管是分离感还是敌对感，那如果你更了解其他的世界和其他的东西的话，它其实这种敌对感或者是隔离感就会减少。对，我觉得是这样的。
So she says that she's not intentionally blurring national boundaries in her work. But she does acknowledge that things work very differently now. Like for the older generation, like the world is much more segregated. Of course, like the pandemic is like a different thing. But prior to the pandemic, there's generally a lot of exchange, a lot of travel, a lot of information flow. So maybe for the older generation, like isolation leads to kind of this imagined feelings of like opposition. But if it's more open, then you would understand more about like the outside world.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point because I think the isolation also led to a level of self-orientalizing. Is that the word?
对，
Where you like heighten your Asian identity because in your imagination it's bigger because you're isolated from the rest of the world. That's an interesting phenomenon that I definitely see, and I see that changing right now. I may be wrong. Do I have time for one more question? Yes? All right. So the question I want to ask is that now China's changing again very rapidly. And I'm wondering how you guys view those changes and how that changes your relationship with your source material. You want to start, Ying?
Sure. I think this is maybe the biggest change that I have witnessed in my lifetime. I felt like I'm thinking of it in a technology way because like in the recent years, you know, the tech from China has raised really fast, you know, like TikTok, and I think it's almost like happening everywhere, you know, because here we also talk about filter bubbles and, you know, the way of use of social media, but I think it's like the use of big data can be like very interesting and it's worth to keep a close look on. So I think I'm interested of like where it's gonna go to, you know, what's the...
So like what we're reading about in the headlines, is that what you're talking about in terms of big data?
I think it's almost got into a point that like it can ground so much power because, you know, like it would never possible before. So it's a really kind of turning point, like which direction it's going to take.
Okay, interesting. I want Pixie to be the last person. All right, so why don't you ask Tao Hui the same question?
对，逃归纳布齐这个问题给翻译一下。他就说，就是中国近几年来发生了巨大的变化。然后他说想问问这个他是怎么影响你的创作，或者是你和你的就是说什么，就是你的创作材料有关系之间发生了什么样的变化？
其实到目前为止，我觉得可能影响我最多的是我的那种就是工作流程或者是一种工作进度，因为它就是你没有办法像之前一样就是有规划的工作，因为它可能突然然后就关了，或者是然后就是暂停了。但我觉得如果把它作为一个材料放到我的作品里，其实还是没有的，因为我觉得可能就是我自己关注的那些东西，然后它一直没有完全被我的创作消耗殆尽，所以说我还是在进行之前的创作，我觉得可能最多对我影响的就是一个工作上的进度，或者是一个平时生活的一个影响，但是在创作上没有太多的影响。
Okay. He says that it is kind of the biggest change is in workflow, how things are like practically how things are conducted. And now he can't really plan for things like ahead a lot, because, you know, a lot of things can happen with sudden lockdowns, a lot of uncertainty. But in terms of the source material and like the subjects that he like pays attention to, it's like not been exhausted, so he's you know continuing to do that. But yeah, it's mostly changed his work and aspects like workflow.
Okay. Yeah, I can imagine that just from the challenges we had pulling everything together here for that, how difficult it must be in Beijing. Could you ask Nabuqi the same question?
那不齐刚才那个问题，就是他问你同样的问题。
对，我也是差不多吧，就是跟陶辉的这种问题，我觉得也差不太多，因为就是有一些合作的这种制作厂啊，或者是供应商啊，他们也会时不时的就停工，就可能突然有一天就停工，然后封什么3天，或者有的可能封的时间更长，半个月，然后就会造成这种工作进度的断断续续吧，就会拉长整个的这个工作的这个制作的过程。但是其他的其实我还 OK， 就是除了交流可能更少一些吧。但是我觉得可能有一个就是这种安静的，或者是回到自己工作室来长时间工作的一个状态，没准也是可能是一个好事吧，我猜想哈。
So she says, yeah, it's like the changes are similar to Tao Hui's, like for example, like the entities that she collaborates with, like the fabricators or like suppliers, like they may just like stop working at any time. They may shut down from like 3 days to like 2 weeks. So it really kind of shifts the progress and makes the fabrication time a lot longer. And kind of like she's also experiencing like less communication with the outside. But she says that one of the maybe a blessing in disguise is that now she is like spending a lot more time in the studio and like focusing on her work.
Interesting. And Pixie, you're about to go.
Oh yeah. So I think because I live in the United States, so I think the China change influence me could be like kind of make me more disconnected with the Chinese society because it's not so easy to go back to China. But I want to comment on this kind of turning point on our generation. So my grandma, when I was very young, my mom always tried very hard to try her best to offer me the best thing she can find in the limited things that she can find in the city. And my grandma at the time, she commented, she gave her a warning. She said, don't treat this kid, don't spoil her, because she might not have, cannot always enjoy the good things. And that's because when she was born, she was actually born abroad, and she was, very well, like a rich family. But then everything she grew up and getting old, everything's going down for her. So for her generation, her view is very transmittive. So it's like she doesn't see future. And my mom was telling me the warning when I was young. I was laughing about it because what is she talking about? Everything's going better and better. That's our belief in our generation. And it has been proven true for the past 30 some years. And I think suddenly, I think around 2017, 18, 19, every year start to make a huge change. And I think that's a huge lesson for all of us. We suddenly wake up we're not going to live a better life in the future. We might not have a better life. So that, I think that's a huge change for our generation. So I think we used to be so optimistic, but now I think
super optimistic.
Super optimistic. But now I just feel like everybody have to just take back and really think about, don't take everything for granted and be really worried about the future and be very careful.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point.
So I think
and that people your age are experiencing that all over the world, actually, too.
Yeah.
I think we can turn to the audience for some questions. That would be great. And I will pick on people.
Oh, I have a question that's similar.
Can you use the mic?
Oh, okay. Because I'm not good at asking questions, but it follows what you were saying. So I worked in the art world for a long time with Chinese artists, and when Chinese artists would, let's say after Harold Zeman and Venice Biennale, artists from China, and it was an advantage, and it was, welcomed, and people were so excited. And then when I was working in Asia, I was shocked when my director said to me, well, we don't want the artists from China because they have too much advantage. They're already powerful. So that kind of follows. Are you feeling, I hate the word discrimination, but if you're from Ethiopia or whatever, there's no power there as big as China's power. So in a way, it's a negative to say, you're a Chinese artist. I'm saying, I don't know that, I'm just wondering if there's been an experience with that, because I experienced it as a professional, that they didn't want to, have artists from China supported because of the power from that country. It was, I was wondering if anyone.
Okay, I just want to be clear. Are you saying because of China's role as a superpower?
Just economically, it kind of followed what Pixie was saying, that a lot of times they don't want to, support artists from the U.S. for many years, because they have money there, so let's support from
a poorer
Rico,
place.
Yeah. So I was wondering if, that identity is not such a positive thing now to even want to talk, not that you are. So I don't know. That's such a clear question.
Did you understand the question?
Yeah, I think, hi, Josie. Hi.
If they've experienced some kind of, in a way, discrimination because of that.
Can you just ask the artists who are in China whether they feel like there's a backlash against Chinese artists going on?
Thank you, Barbara.
Yeah, well, that's what I get paid the big bucks for.
对，刚才陶慧纳布齐，他刚才问的这个问题就是说，就是你们有没有，就是因为现在很多西方就是把中国看成中国是强国嘛，然后这种然后可能就是强国，然后又加强势，然后所以说 你作为艺术家有没有经历过那种就是好像别人不愿意去支持你，因为这种身份或者是这种这方面的这种批判？你说的对，
就是有的时候就是他们情愿去资助一些比较小的亚洲国家的艺术家，而因为他觉得中国艺术家已经太强大了，他们的艺术家不需要被支持，所以有的时候中国艺术家反而就会失去一些机会。
对，可能就是
说你身为就中国艺术家应该是一个很大的机会，但是有的时候你因为你这个身份的问题，这反而是我也不知道。
对，因为刚才还说就是说之前就可能是10几年前就是形势不一样，就是可能就是作为中国艺术家好像是有一定的优势还是怎么着，然后但是现在发生
对，就是过去可能大家都对中国艺术家特别感兴趣，但是现在中国艺术家已经变成了一个这么强大的一个群体，反而大家会有些时候会失去对中国艺术家的兴趣。
Okay. 英文。
Oh, so I would say because if I understand right, is the Chinese artists as a group used to be gaining so much interest from everywhere, but now since we as a group has become so much bigger and then the countries become superpower, and now people are kind of losing interest in us because we are no longer the new like upcoming artist group, so that's kind of like a disadvantage. Yeah.
你们要不要回答一下？
我可以回答一下，就是我觉得这种现象肯定是有，就是我听到过很多，就是有朋友或者是更年轻的艺术家跟我讲这种事情，就比如说他们失去了某个机会，然后但是那个机会被放到了另外一个可能更小的亚洲国家的艺术家身上，但是我目前在我身上还没有发现，可能我是怎么讲，就有比较长久的工作经验的，可能就是现在就是基本上有自己的一个就是工作方式，可能还没有被这种东西然后就是影响到，但是我确实听说有这种事情发生。
He says that it hasn't happened to him personally. He hasn't been affected by that, but he has heard like from friends or from like younger artists saying that they have like lost opportunity to like an artist from like a smaller, like less powerful Asian country.
Interesting. Does this question affect any of you in terms of how you think of your artwork?
I kind of worry about it. Like sometimes, I think especially after the pandemic, there's such a strong Asian hate in the society in the West, and I think, last year, like April, when it was still kind of very bad time, I had a solo show in New York. And I was very worried because I don't know how the audience is going to respond. Suddenly there's a Asian artist, like a Chinese artist, have this solo show in New York at that time when like there's so much hate against Asians. I think that's a worry, but but as the show opens, I still see the audience, and I think that people who came to see the show all really welcomes it. So I think maybe. But there's always I worry about it because I know that China doesn't have a good image right now. And I think sometimes people will hate you because of your Chinese identity.
Interesting. Another question?
Hi, this has been really interesting. I have been reading Barbara's work on China for a long time, and it's great to see people that I've read about, in person. But I wanted to also follow up a little bit on Pixie's question when you were talking about your grandmother and the generations. Listening to you talk, it all sounds like you guys were sort of self-created, like you went to these art schools, society was changing so much, you really invented yourself as these global artists. were there any older Chinese artists that you felt a connection to or like a mentorship from? And the second part of the question is, Barbara started talking to you guys all probably like 15 or 20 years ago. Are there any people 15 or 20 years, well, less than that?
Less than, probably 10.
10, okay. Are there any people in the next generation, Chinese artists, that you feel are like in dialogue with your works in any way? I'm curious about how you relate to older Chinese artists and also maybe the next generation of Chinese artists.
Let's start with the artists in China, because I see them about to fall asleep.
对，刚才他问一个问题，就是说，他是你和跨代代际之间的艺术家的关系，就是有没有就是上一代就是老一辈的这种艺术家，就是好像对于你们起了很关键的这种作用，像导师这样的这种身份的人。然后呢，同样的还有没有就是比你们年轻一代的，然后你觉得和你的作品有对话或者就这样的艺术家？
我觉得好像是在就是中国有这个传统吧，就是像我是从四川美术学院毕业以后，然后来到北京，就有很多学长啊，或者是那种就是校友，然后就是已经很成功的艺术家在北京，然后他们就会然后跟你聊天，然后就是他们也希望你可以真正的做一个职业艺术家或者怎样，然后比如他们会收藏你的作品，他喜欢你的作品，然后他也会跟你聊一些他的艺术或者对你创作上的见解。然后我是觉得好像是有这个传统，就是长辈老一辈的艺术家，然后就是好像对年轻一辈的艺术家都是很关心的，然后包括就是我来北京这么多年以后，然后有我们新的，然后那种就是校友，就是学弟学妹来北京，然后你也会在他身上发现你一些之前的创作的影子或者怎样，然后你就会想努力，然后就跟他聊天，然后就是互相然后影响吧，我觉得是。
我先翻译一下。So Tao Hui says in China there's like a tradition of like older artists like mentoring younger ones. Like for example, like he graduated from the Sichuan Academy of Art, and when he moved to Beijing, like there would be like the alumni there that would meet and then they would chat to him about like ideas in their art, and they would also collect his art to support him and exchange, etc. He also says the same applies to younger artists like from the same school, like who would move to Beijing, and then he would also meet them and like see his earlier thoughts, like see his younger self reflected in their practice. So it's like a cycle that way.
I'm curious. I think more to the point of Ellen's question is, could you ask him if he was influenced by Yang Fudong's work or if he met Yang Fudong?
Yang Fudong.
He is a very good teacher for me, I think.
Yeah, and everybody, you can see Yang Fudong's work on the third floor in our galleries here.
Could you want Nabuqi to?
Yes.
对，Nabuqi，然后就是同样的那个问题，就是关于导师，有没有老一辈的导师或者新一代的，就是继续你会去影响的这种艺术家？
对，有啊，就是其实我在大学的几位老师。就是也不是所有的，但是基本上教我的有几位老师都是现在的当代的艺术家，就是比如说有雕塑的艺术家有隋建国，有展望，然后有江杰，所以他们其实肯定或多或少对我的影响也会比较大。然后那现在就成为这个职业艺术家之后呢，其实有很多年轻的，就比我年轻的艺术家，他们的作品也非常好，我也是蛮欣赏的。所以我觉得这种相互影响或者是交错的关系，其实应该是一直都在的，而且 是一个良性的关系吧。对。
Yeah. So she says that in like university, she had a lot of professors that really like impacted her work. 隋建国、展望、江杰, and they influenced her a lot. And after becoming a professional artist,
and I just want to interject. These are like towering figures in terms of Chinese sculpture, the three professors that she talked about. Yeah.
And so after she became a professional artist, she's seeing that a lot of younger artists are making like amazing work, and she's like really appreciating it. And so this kind of like mutual influencing, shaping each other is like a really positive thing.
You guys, is it Western or Chinese artists influence you more?
I think Western artists influence me more because I think I'm outside this Chinese academy system, so I really know very little about the old generation Chinese artists. But I think I really like some like Sophie Kali's work or Alina Brothers' work. Those are like female artists in the West. But I think for young generation, actually, I actually do a lot of mentorship in the like art schools in New York City, and I think sometimes the young artists, if they like my work, they can request, oh, I want Pixie to be my mentor, and I really enjoying like talking to them about like work, and yeah.
And we don't have much time left, but I just wanted to point out that Miao Ying studied with Zhang Peli, who ran the department there, who is considered the godfather of Chinese video art. So there is, an older generation that did groundbreaking work that allowed this generation to emerge. Mm-hmm. All right. I think we have run the gamut. And I have to thank, first of all, Asia Society and Corinna, and I must thank Banyi Huang.
Thank you for
excellent job, excellent comments, and all of the artists, Nabuqi, Tao Hui, Pixy Liao, and Miao Ying. 非常感谢。
Thank you.